We will get started in just a few minutes. Our normal 4 after. We'll let folks join. Welcome. We'll give folks a few minutes. We'll start at our normal 4 after. If somebody could do an audio check and a video check. Video is going to be a little blurry until I get inside probably. I locked myself out, so Ben should be here in a few minutes. We'll get settled. Thank you, Shannon. Appreciate that. Thank you, Dakota. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you, Kimberly. Appreciate that. All right, we're a couple after. We'll give folks another 2 minutes to join, and then we'll get started. Temporary change of scenery. We are outside the building. I locked myself out, so Ben just got here, and we'll hop in. Keypad. It's on the list now, Sue. Oh. Oh, it's been a long day. Somebody ordered 1,000 pounds of Frass, so it's a good problem to have. Take your time, Ben. It's my fault. Oh, I gotta get my apple. Ben saves us. Whew. Everything should be cleaned up in there. Ready to go.
Okay, yeah.
That's the 1,000 pounds.
That's 1,000 pounds. That's half a ton.
Yeah.
That's a half ton of Frass.
It's a lot of
It
Frass.
doesn't look like very much.
No.
It's like the weight of concrete or something.
So, yeah, that's what I was doing this morning. Somebody ordered, there's 50 pounds in each one of those bags. And there's one bag extra. So I did 200 pounds last night, and then the rest of it today. So I'm exhausted, and I was so tired that I walked out of here, locked the building, and left my keys here. So thank you guys for being patient and bearing with my bad memory here. We'll get settled and get rolling. If you guys have any questions, start teeing those up. At some point, I will be able to look at all those. Try to sit down here. All right. 1,000 pounds, farmer. You could say that. You could say that. Okay. Video should be much better now, less wobbly. I also didn't eat anything today until about 30 minutes ago, so get that sugar back in me. Okay, let's see here. Good afternoon, everyone. All right, we will go ahead and get started now that I'm settled here. Thank you guys for being patient. Hi. For those of you that may not know me, I'm Justin, the Mealworm guy. I run Midwest Mealworms here in Ashland, Missouri, and I'm an admin in the Mealworm Farming Co-op group. And so we are meeting, I can't say once every week now. I keep missing weeks, but we try to meet once a week and just go through any Q&A you guys might have, any issues you're having, any successes you're having. Let's share those. Let's celebrate that. We just try to have a good time. So as you guys have questions, please throw those out there. Every now and then, disclaimer that I like to plug, Facebook doesn't show me all the comments. So if I am seemingly ignoring your question or your comment, either tag me in that, shoot me a DM, whatever's easiest for you, and I'll take a look at that. All right. Big changes in the farm too. Ben's going to be in there, but I might throw my mask on if we get to it, and go ahead and get in there. Hopefully your Frass customer lives nearby and has a big truck. Yes, it's a local customer, so right now, and part of the reason I had to redo all that is that we have been shipping. We've been shipping our Frass in boxes, so anywhere from our 1 pound pouch that fits in a regional A box doesn't do well in the padded envelope for whatever reason. But the boxes work much better. So we do the 1 pound pouches, we send those out, and then there's also listings and on the website for, I want to say, starting at 3 pounds, 3, 4, 5, 8, 10, 20, and 65. So anything above that is just a direct reach out to me, and then we go from there. And for this particular customer, hopefully they're going to buy monthly. We'll see how things pan out. But the plan is to get totes. So since they're local, what we'll do is we'll fill those totes for them, and then I won't have to re-sift it all, because I packaged it in the Substrate bags, the wheat bran bags. And anytime somebody orders, I go through, like, we'll fill that thing, and it might have some substrate on the bottom, some loose bran down at the bottom of that. And so when I'm packaging up orders, I just leave the bottom alone, basically, and I kind of pilfer that and use it for myself. But since this customer wanted all those bags, I went through and re-sifted all of it. So I set up a temporary vibration machine to go through it a little quicker than me just shaking. And in the future, like I mentioned, we'll probably hopefully get totes. And then we just fill that as we're processing. And that way there's no substrate in there that we have to worry about. I won't have to repackage it. I won't get exhausted and lock myself out of the building. So, yeah, it's been a long day. Long day. All right, do you guys have any questions? I had a couple things cooking that I can chat about, or we can jump into some Q&A. It has gotten cold, although it's going to warm back up, supposedly. We got down into the 20s, I think, last couple days. And so yesterday I finally got around to installing the permanent heat source. So I'm testing that out now to see how that goes. Fingers crossed that should work. Shannon, I'm soldering my first fully grown mealworms. Yes! I remember seeing that. Also bought the 5-piece sifter. How often should I sift the worms? I have worms separated by ages of 2 weeks right now, but I see a lot of size difference and want to separate. Yes, so the size difference isn't something to worry about. That just naturally happens. So we're doing once a week beetle swap right now, and we still see size variance. It's just a matter of when those eggs get laid in the cycle, and how long it takes for them to grow. So like today, Ben's going to do beetle swap, and as he finishes that tray and puts the beetles in a new tray, if they lay an egg today, and then we don't touch that and do a beetle swap until a week from today when another egg is laid, that's a 1 week difference. And size at that point is minuscule difference, right? But 1 week as they grow over time gets to be bigger and bigger. And so seeing that size variance isn't something to worry about. How often should you sift? Cheryl, I see that question there. We'll tackle that here in just a sec. How often should you sift? It really depends on what system you're trying to do, and with the size variance, you want to avoid leaving the pupa in there until they hatch, because then there'll be beetles. They can start laying eggs, and you don't want eggs in your Frass. You don't want to lose those babies. So if you get to a point where your substrate and your Frass are 2 to 2.5 inches thick, you want to start looking at separating that out. When your Frass gets about 1 inch thick, that's probably when you want to start playing with that and sifting it out. We usually don't get to the point where it's 1 inch thick. By the time that they're far enough along in our timeline here, we are sifting that entire tray. And so it doesn't get to that thickness, but you want to avoid getting real thick in the Frass because it's dense. The mealworms don't really like dense things like that. They can get crushed potentially, so they don't go down into it, and they have to stay on top. So you want to, like there's not a sift every Tuesday kind of thing. It really depends on how quickly your colony is growing, and if those larger worms start to pupate, I'd go ahead and do it because I don't want to waste the frass. I want to capture that and get it without any eggs in it. Having the worm separated by 2 weeks, that's perfectly fine. We did that in the previous facility, ran like that for probably 3 years, and produced a bunch out of that. It's just a matter of monitoring your trays and seeing what needs to happen from a sifting perspective. Blake, welcome back. Thank you. Okay, Cheryl, what size of mesh gets rid of all of the substances? By substances, do you mean substrate? Was that a fun autocorrect? Or what do you mean by substances that are in there? Oh, man. My brain is still just worrying with all the fun I just had. I had an order, somebody that ordered in Montana reach out today that their starter kit arrived dead, unfortunately, so I'm going to have to reship that. My guess is it sat somewhere too long. I need to check the tracking to see. Cheryl, substrate. Okay, what size of mesh gets rid of all the substrate? It depends, unfortunately, and let me explain why. What substrate are you using? So if you can throw that in there, that would be great. And regardless of what substrate that is, you're going to have particles that are finer, like wheat bran, for example. There's going to be some dust particles in there. There's going to be some smaller particles in there. Those, if you sift right away, you're going to get those through even a 1/30th mesh sifter, which is what we use here to sift out the frass and get to a final frass product that we then ultimately sell. If you're using something really fine, like a powder, wheat mill run. Okay, so that there's going to be some dust and some powder in there, but that's usually eaten up first. So when you put that into a tray, the mealworms are going to go after that for a couple reasons. One, the smaller mealworms can eat it much more efficiently, and two, even the larger worms will tackle that because it's easier for them to eat it. And so they're going to eat that up pretty quickly. And so what you will be left with is either nothing but frass if you wait until it's all gone, or the bigger chunks of that stuff. And the 1/30th mesh will catch 95%, let's say, a really high percentage of that substrate out of there. You could try, so I did a 1/50th mesh. I want to say that was like a year and a half ago. And what I found is that it just took forever for the frass to get through there because it's a finer mesh, obviously. And once it was done, what it had collected and not let through, there was little pieces of wheat bran, little tiny pieces that made it through the 1/30th, but not the 1/50th. And it wasn't enough from my perspective, even as a consumer. If I was buying that product and it had that amount of wheat bran in it versus the frass that was in there, I would be okay with that. And so I always tell people there's going to be a small percentage of wheat bran in there. If they want it completely wheat bran free, then that's going to raise the price because I have to re-sift it, or it takes a lot longer, so the time and effort into that is a lot higher, and so that has to be compensated for. So usually the 1/30th should work fine. That's going to get all the substrate out. Now, the other thing I'll mention is the 1/30th, if you've got substrate in that, not in the sifter, in your tray. So let's say you've got substrate and frass, and you need to go ahead and sift that tray for whatever reason. There's plenty of valid reasons why that would need to happen. When it goes through that sifting process, it's going to take a little longer because that bran or that wheat mill run is going to sit there on top of the mesh and not go through, and basically like act as a clog. And so you'll have to run your hands through it to help move things through faster, and it's going to go a little slower. And so that's one of the benefits to over time getting in tune with your trays and knowing how much substrate you put in, about how many mealworms you're putting in there and how long it takes for them to eat through all that, so that you can time that to where, once you start a tray, you have a general idea of when that thing's going to be ready to sift very efficiently. Because if there's just Frass in there, it just goes. And so that's something that over time you'll get used to. In the beginning, consider that your learning curve, right? Like, you'll start doing that sifting process and you'll quickly realize, it's worth taking the time to figure out those numbers of quantity you're putting in, how long it's there, that sort of thing, or time it differently to do it later. And if you don't have the luxury of that because something's going on, you're going on vacation, that's just, part of the gig. Okay, Cheryl, awesome. Thank you. That was a good question. Kimberly, and I see a couple others down below that. Kimberly, how do you decide how much bran to give and when? We started off having about 10-to-1 bran, but I've seen recently the flip side ratio. Do you use bran for a bedding or just as feed? What is a 10-to-1? How much bran do you give and when? We started off about 10-to-1 bran. Kimberly, can you let me know what 10-to-1 means? Because what we're doing here, how much bran you give and when? So let me run you through what we're doing here and why. We are putting in approximately 500 grams of bran right now in a 600 millimeter by 400 millimeter tray, roughly 24 inches by 16 inches. So we're putting 500 grams in there of wheat bran and 1,500 Beetles. And what we are finding is that 500 grams of bran is not enough to get that tray to the end state without having to add more. And so what we're doing is, temporarily, when we do Beetle swap, we are adding in another scoop, another 500 grams of bran into that tray after we've gone through the process of sifting the Beetles out. So since it takes time to sift that wheat bran, we add just the 500 grams, or we sift it, we put the egg-laden bran back in that tray, add another scoop of bran, and put the Beetles in a fresh tray. So we end up ultimately with 1,000 grams of substrate in that tray that then spans across the 8 to 10 weeks it takes for them to get done. We've been running short lately. I think on the last live a couple weeks ago, I mentioned that we were having to add wheat bran in, and a couple folks very correctly gave me a little bit of a hard time around just add it in at the beginning. There's a mess with it. So 100% correct. It's just a fine tuning thing. And so from a ratio perspective, I can't say what that ratio is, not because I don't want to, but because it doesn't make sense. My ratio is going to be different than everyone else's. So we're at 80 degrees Fahrenheit, 70% humidity. And we're at that very consistently, although in the last week we struggled because of the cold, but I'm fixing that. And so the amount of Beetles we put in, the amount we feed them, the amount we give moisture, all that stuff factors into how long it's going to take for that tray to get to a complete point. And so what I strongly suggest is just keep some of that data. We have a notebook here that we write everything down in of what we did and when, and that has been invaluable, where we either run into a hiccup, like we don't have anything to harvest this week, what the heck happened, or we have just a huge week. We go through that notebook to try to see, like, what did we do when, where's that magic sauce that we didn't even realize we were doing, that sort of thing. So I wouldn't say there's an actual ratio there, because it's going to vary based on your environment conditions. From a lab perspective, they have very fine material or very fine tools to keep things at certain levels. And so they've tested, how much a mealworm consumes and yada, yada. That just becomes too, I don't want to say too scientific, but just not applicable in an actual small farm like this. I think when you're talking bigger, like Beta Hatch and their artificial intelligence and their software and all the stuff they're doing, and the robotics that the folks over in Europe have been using for a while, I think that really they can fine tune that, because they're using things and sensing and doing a whole lot more than we are. I think they'll actually count out the eggs, weigh them, and put an exact precise amount of eggs to hatch in a bin. And if you can do that, control everything, then you can get a very precise ratio. Whale, I think I'm saying that right, W-A-E-L, whale. If I'm not, please let me know. You came late, no worries. We're here just to party and have fun. Did you mention about different diets? I have not. So throw some questions out there, or give some more context around that. All right, so we're starting to stack up. I see Caitlin, how do you figure out pricing? And then there's some more after that. So Caitlin, how do you figure out pricing? Pricing for what? Mealworms, Frass, tools, time. What sort of pricing? Wholesale, retail. It's all over the place from a context perspective. So shoot some of that in there. Well, 10 days to 1 month. Like mostly brand with just a few worms. 90% branded, 10%. Okay. 10 to 1. Yeah, let me think about that. So we're doing 500 grams, 1,000 grams total, 1,500 beetles. So theoretically, I should be able to calculate how, in a fuzzy math world, if we're putting 1,500 beetles in, hopefully there's a 50-50 ratio of male to female, right? So you have to take into account that those 1,500 beetles are not 1,500 females. And so that's the other thing, is the math's going to be a little off. Or not off, but just not super precise, I guess. So 750 beetles times, and this is where it gets really funky. Remember that beetles are going to lay, female beetles will lay 95% plus of their eggs in the first 2 months of their life. And in the first like 2 or 3 weeks, it's very high, and then it starts to taper off to where, like if in the first week of a beetle's life, when they lay those eggs, they might lay, I'm just pulling numbers here, I'm just making stuff up. Let's say 200 eggs. I'd have to go research this to see what their actual amount is. But let's say it's 200 eggs in the first week. They might lay 200 in the last month, because there's a curve there. And so that's also going to play into your ratio here of brand to worms. You could harvest the eggs. There's very high price technology to do that. As far as I know, I'm not sure of a cost efficient way for folks like us to do that, to harvest the eggs. But then the other option you could do is to harvest the larva later on. So one of the things we do is whenever we harvest trays that are ready with large mealworms that are either ready to sell because they're big enough, or they're starting to pupate, when we harvest those, we always have some mealworms that are just behind, that aren't big enough to be harvested. And so what we'll do is we'll take 500 grams of those smaller mealworms, and we'll put that in with another 500 grams of bran. So that's a 1-to-1 there. And so that's, as we're harvesting, I'm not keeping track of, when I pull a tray, how many mealworms are in that tray. That's just too time intensive at this point. And so we just sift out, we harvest, and then whatever's left, we've got our pupa, our beetles, and larger worms that go back into the colony to keep things going. We have our harvested worms that get prepared for sale. And then we have our smaller mealworms that get put back into a tray, 500 grams of those and 500 grams of wheat bran. And then they'll sit in those trays and just continue to grow until the next time that tray gets harvested. Caitlin, scrolling, sorry. Wheat bran is getting expensive, so we want to swap the banana leaf meal and make it as a brand. Wheat bran did go up in price. Mine, I think, is up to 38 cents a pound, 40 cents a pound. So tomorrow I'm headed to the feed store. I also sell mealworms at that store, so I'm going to replenish and restock. And while I'm there, I'm going to talk to them about alternative options and what the pricing is, because I think it's getting to a point where wheat bran versus something else could be better. I'm just testing out, let's see, flattened oats. I've got those coming tomorrow. I've got whole oats that I ground up this week, and I'm testing those. The whole oats I don't really like for in the actual growing cycle, because the hulls, if they don't eat the hulls, it doesn't look like the outer skin, and so it just gunks up things and gets into everything as you're sifting and sorting. But it might work for the pupation trays. again, just depends on if they eat it and if everything's okay. So I'm playing around with that now, along with the beetle powder. So I don't know if anybody saw the videos I put out recently. I took the beetles, some of the beetles that we culled, and dehydrated, put them in the deep freeze for like 4 or 5 days. I had a lot of stuff going on, so longer than I needed to. Took them out and put them, dehydrated them, and then put them through a powderizer to get them into a powder form. And now I've got superworms and mealworms in that, just that, to see if they'll eat it or not. They'll get water gel crystals, so they have plenty of moisture, and we'll just see if they eat that feed source. So could be interesting. A few people interested in buying mealworms. Lucas, I see the question there about Denzovirus. I'll get to that here in a second. Caitlin, I've had a few people who are interested in buying mealworms. Okay, so local prices, and when I say local, I mean like local pickup. Versus shipping prices, like if you were to ship to them, versus local retail prices. There's a whole smattering there potentially from a local perspective. If you're selling to an individual, my prices are $10 for 1,000, and then $5 for every 1,000 on top of that. $10 for 1,000 is pretty steep, but what I've been doing up until now is I would meet somebody somewhere locally, usually at the gas station, or sorry, the grocery store in town. There's an ATM on the north side of the parking lot. It's well lit if we have to meet there at some time other than during daylight, so it's safe for them, safe for me, and there's usually a lot of people there. So because I have to meet someone there, that's time, that's gas, that's effort, right? And so that's where the $10 started, because that's high for 1,000 mealworms. Really, $5 local price should be more than enough, unless you factor in time and whatnot. And I usually try to do it when I'm going to an appointment or doing something in town. I go there every day for family stuff, so I try to time it around that. But that's the base price for just mealworms by the count. So if you're looking at shipping to somebody, I've got prices on my website. Shipping is generally, right now it's running like $8.50 for very close to my state, so my state and the surrounding states, and then it goes incrementally up based on how far away we get. So if you're shipping, that's a whole different ballgame, but we can talk through that if that's where you're headed. Stores though, like local stores, that's really going to depend on what that store wants to do, whether they want to do a consignment type scenario where they get a percentage but you get most of it. Usually that's how that works, just really depends on the situation. Or if they want to buy it outright, then they're buying it at wholesale, and then they're going to mark it up obviously, and sell it that way. So I see what about wholesale to a feed store? Yes, so let's continue with that. Lucas, I see your question, and Kimberly. So Lynn, what about wholesale to a feed store? Yeah, from a local sale perspective, there's the consignment where you put the items in their store. Somebody comes and buys those for, let's say, $10 for 1,000 mealworms. I'm just using rough numbers here. $10 for 1,000 mealworms. The store generally is going to get anywhere from 20 to 40%. Depending on the store. That's been my experience here in the Midwest. So they'll get 20 to 40%, you get whatever's left. And you don't get paid unless that sells, right? And so that's what I do with the mealworms at Born Feed, where I get all my substrate. I'm up there once a week anyway, and so I go up there, I restock everything. So I will pull the mealworms that haven't been purchased, and the superworms as well. I'll take those back with me. They come back into the colony, and I will restock. During the summer, during peak, we had 18 cups of 500 count and 4 cups of supers. And now with the season winding down, bird season anyway, winding down, we're back to 10 cups of mealworms and 4 cups of superworms. And so as I go in, the arrangement I have with the folks there is every week we just keep track of what sold that week. And at the end of the month, I tally that up. I let them know what they owe me, and we go from there. You could work that out differently for whoever you're with. I have another store that they buy directly from me at wholesale prices. And what I do there is I'm looking at what the market's going to bring. I have to be careful because I don't want to price that to where it's going to either compete with my prices or there's no incentive for a customer to buy from them because my prices are very, very different than the store's prices. And so really that's a regional thing. From a wholesale perspective though, you're probably looking at like a 50 to 60% of what your retail price would be or what their retail price would be. So, I mean, it really depends on what they're going to sell it for and what you're willing to sell it for. That's the other thing is, as I started out, Born Feed was actually my second customer store, and Bird's Eye View was my first. And so I just openly told both those guys, I said, I've never sold in a store before. I don't know how this works. What's going to work best for you? And then they worked with me. They didn't try to take advantage of me. They didn't try to do anything dirty or wrong. They helped me understand how things needed to work for them. And then I, from my perspective, here's what I needed. And so I haven't changed my prices for those guys because they've been with me for years at this point. But it really just depends on what the market's going to bring and then what the store's willing to potentially pay. Only planning on person to person at this point, eventually planning on going to animal expos. Go with the other thing you can do is check for your competition, right? So check on Craigslist, do a search on Facebook, even though it's not super wise to list on Facebook, some people still do. And just do some random searching around. Maybe get into some reptile groups that are local to your area and search for keywords like mealworms, even spelled differently, spaced, like meal space worms or mealies, or look for those various terms and see if anybody has posted anything about that to try to get a sense of what local prices might be. There are some places where the prices are honestly astronomical compared to where I'm at, but it's because there's nobody else there, right? Supply and demand. So that's where I would start, Caitlin, is to do some quick research on how much it costs around you. And then that will give you a good idea of what your potential prices could be and what you're willing to do. When I first started selling to individuals, so I founded the business in 2017 and then started selling to individuals. I highly advise you guys look into like LLCs or S Corps or something if you're in the US, and separate your personal assets from your mealworm stuff. Because that way, if something were to happen, if somebody's animal, died for some reason and they blame your mealworms, you want to have things separate. So there is a risk there, and you need to think about that before venturing into that. Think of worst case scenario type situations. It's not going to be all, oh man, look at the money coming in from all the mealworms. There could be some issues. But when I first started, I remember I drove to Holt Summit, which is about a 25-minute drive from here, and I sold mealworms for $6.50. It took me more gas just to get there, not to mention the time or anything. But I went and I started asking, I remember the lady, I started asking her some questions just to learn. And so that learning experience was fantastic. So take that into account too, that, you might feel like you're undercutting yourself, but you might need to price pretty low to get people familiar with you, to build your name up, your brand up over time, so that word of mouth, people chat, people talk, and so that will help your mealworm stuff start to get some recognition, and it might just mean you have lower prices so that people take that risk on you if you're brand new at this. All right. Awesome question. Oh, one more thing. Caitlin, don't really have any other big name pet store. The closest individual I found is almost an hour away. So, you could throw something out there like $10 for 1,000 or $13 for 1,000, and, maybe have a minimum order too, depending on, are you willing to meet someone somewhere? Are you okay with them coming to a location near you? I never had anybody, before we had a separate facility, I never had anybody come to my property because that's where I lived. We used a building on our property for the mealworm business, and I didn't have people come to my property. I would travel to town and meet them there. If you're comfortable with that, or there's a locale, like if you're in a subdivision and you can go to the corner of somewhere and meet up with somebody, if you're in an apartment complex, go to the front gate, right? Like, depending on what your situation is, make it safe for you, make it safe for them, and then figure out what's it worth from your time and effort perspective. So, really good questions. Caitlin, if you want to chat about that individually, hit me up. We can set up a time and talk through that. Okay. Lucas, you have been very patient. Thank you. Can you tell us of the Denzovirus? Yes. Denzovirus is a virus that is most commonly found in the superworms. So Zophobos morio. And what it does is it will infect a colony, and it will start to kill them off slowly at first. You'll find them like dead and putrefied and like squishy and gross. They're not dried out. They're very black. And eventually the entire bin will get the Denzovirus and likely die. Low survival rate. And once you have it, it can spread. If you were to use that trick, like let's say you got rid of all those, the substrate, the superworms that were in there, you got rid of that, you kept that tote, and you use it again, you could still have the Denzovirus in there. So what I've read is you can use bleach to clean it very well, but then there are people that have done that and still several months later have another recurrence of it. So I'm still struggling a little bit with the superworms. I had that about a year ago, I think. I've cleaned everything. I've gotten everything squared away, and I'm rebuilding the colony. I'm using different trays. Like, I'm trying to keep everything completely separate. I have not noticed a crossover from superworms to mealworms. So that was one of my, like panic moments when I first started seeing this was, oh no, what's going to happen? And so far, I personally have not had it go from the superworms to the mealworms, and others who have had the Denzovirus have not reported that it's crossing over to mealworms yet. So mealworms are, they are a very true species to high population density. Like they live together like that, right? Like they pupate, they become beetles. They're all the larvae together. They are acclimatized to that. The Zophobos aren't. They are not a high density insect. You can raise them that way, and that's really one of the only ways that makes sense to do that, especially in the US, just from a space perspective. But the problem with that is it becomes much more potential for diseases to spread. So think of it, Zophobos, think of it like a human. Like if two humans go into an elevator and one sneezes, there's a chance that other person's going to get that. But if you've got an elevator full of 30 people and one person becomes sick and starts sneezing, it's going to spread pretty quickly because they're all jammed in there real close, right? Same principle or concept with the Zophobos. They are just more prone to those issues, and then it wipes the colony out. So I have not heard of any sort of cure or treatment that saves it. That's something that I think folks are still researching and looking into. So not a good thing to have. Not a good thing to have. Kimberly, what do people do with Frass? Why does this happen? Every time I move this, or every time I go to try to scroll, I completely lose the question I'm reading. What do people do with Frass? Anything besides putting in the garden? That's a good question. There's some more questions down below here. Average number of eggs, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll get to those in just a moment. Thank you guys for being patient. So what do people do with Frass? Frass has a lot of different applications. So Frass can be utilized as a premix, so you can mix it into, if you're getting soil prepped for gardens, or you're going to start, a greenhouse. They'll start their seedlings in the blocks. soil blocks, right? If you're mixing that up, you can add Frass to that premix, and that way the Frass is inside of that premix. You can broadcast it, just simply walk over to your garden or lawn, indoor plants, although I don't recommend it for indoor plants, and I'll tell you why in a sec. Just broadcast that on the top, and the Frass will then be there, and you can either water it in immediately, so you control when it's getting down into your garden or your lawn, or you could just let Mother Nature do its thing, and the next time it rains, all that's going to saturate down in there. I like the watering yourself method because then don't apply Frass more frequently than every 2 weeks. There's really no purpose to it. It's still going to be there doing its thing for about 2 weeks. And so if you broadcast that out and it doesn't rain for a month, and you go out and broadcast it again 2 weeks later, before that rain comes in another 2 weeks, then you're over applying. You're just putting it out for no reason. So I like the apply and then spray water, or apply it right before it's going to do some raining. Don't put it on indoor plants broadcast or like sprinkle it in, because it'll over time develop a crust on top of because Frass is not water soluble 100%, so it'll stay there and start to build up. You can also use Frass as a foliar spray, so mix it into water, let it sit for a little while. You do want to strain out, like use a tea bag or some sort of cheesecloth, something that's going to hold the Frass, so that it permeates into the water, but you can then pull that out so that the solid stuff that's left over doesn't clog up anything. But then you can use that foliar spray and spray that on indoor plants, although that's going to make kind of a mess, but outdoor plants, to spray it directly on leaves. It'll absorb that in through the leaves as well. And then you can also do a compost tea. So compost tea is taking that Frass, putting it in water, and letting it steep or sit. You can add aeration. That's one of the ways to get a much higher quantity of good microbacteria or microbiome within the Frass, within that compost tea, is to aerate it. You don't have to do that, but it does help. And then you take that and just pour that into indoor plants. That's a really good method for indoor plants. Pour it in those. Same thing for outdoor plants. You can apply it that way. And then whatever's left, so whether you've done the foliar spray and you pull out the cheesecloth thing, or you've got the compost tea and it's settled on the bottom, when you get down to that, just gunk basically, I take that and I put that outside. So into the compost bin, or in our case, into the compost area. It's not a bin, it's a bunch of pallets we put together. So Frass has a lot of different applications. It's also, I'm starting to see people integrate it into existing products. So like folks that have earthworm castings are integrating Frass into that because earthworm castings don't have chitin, right? Only insects have that chitin from their exoskeleton, along with shellfish and crabs, like those sorts of things. And so the earthworm castings can be improved with that Frass that contains the chitin in it. So it's good stuff. We need a lot more research on it. So there is research out there. Yord Producers was a company out in Nebraska, a mealworm company. They partnered with University of Nebraska and did a tomato study. I believe they published that. I'd have to go back and look and see if I can find it. But it showed positive results for tomatoes. And so that's where, and Beta Hatch. Beta Hatch actually tested their Frass with a golf course. They put it in their mix for divot repair, and they said that the grass sprouted earlier or sooner than it normally would have without the Frass. So I take that for what you will. I did a test recently of Frass on clover and grass and didn't see a difference from a sprouting perspective, but more testing is needed. Okay, can you tell us Denzovirus? Scrolling. Okay. What's the average number of eggs a beetle can produce in 2 to 3 months? Sue, did you already beat me to this answer? No. I don't know, to be honest. I used to know. Let's see if I can find it real quick without messing up the live here. Kaidosin, yes, Whale, Kaidosin. Does anybody know, Whale, do you know, is there a way to test the amount of chitin within a given product, let's say Frass, or like the beetle flour that I made, I'm really curious if I can get the percentage of the chitin in there without some super expensive test. We've got an answer of 500 eggs per lifespan, it's only 200 to 500 per female. That sounds accurate. I feel like 500 was in my head for some reason, but I didn't want to throw that out without 100 to 200 at a time, 500 over their life. Yeah, that seems like a. I was trying to find. I was going to look for a paper from Juan Ramos Morales. He's studied mealworms for decades, and he's got a lot of really interesting research that he's published. And I feel like there were definitely studies on fecundity, the egg laying process, improving that, and he published several things there. I probably need to go back and look at some of that now that it's been several years and see if there's anything that applies that we can take advantage of. There was a lot of info, and some of it's a little, I don't want to say dense. It's me that's dense, right? Like I don't really enjoy reading very, very scientific things. So the research papers are sometimes hard for me to read just because I don't enjoy that sort of thing. So if you are into that, Juan Ramos Morales, and Ramos Morales is hyphenated. He's got a lot of really good research out there. And he will actually reply to emails. He's still active in the mealworm world, and I've emailed him several times over the last couple of years, and he replies. Like, it's pretty cool. All right, and remember about those egg laying. I was going to say egg laying beetles. Yes, the females lay eggs. They're going to lay 95+% of those in the first 2 months. And so that quantity of eggs, those are going to be done. And after that 2 months, it just plummets, absolutely plummets. What do people, Sue with a follow-up. One hint though, only make as much tea as you will reasonably use at a time. You can store it in the fridge for up to a week, but it's just easier to make it when needed. Yes, awesome point. Thank you, Sue. If I have more than I need, I dump it in the garden or on the grass. Yes, very, very good point. Thank you for the assist there. It would be really interesting to try to like from a product perspective. Ben and I have talked quite a bit about what was the word I'm hunting for? Plant. Oh man, plant. Nutrients, but there's another word. Anyway, it was along those lines of making these products that are ready to use, but how do you from a shelf life perspective, if you one of the beneficial things about Frass is that it's got a lot of microbes in it. They can be bad microbes, right? If you're raising them in a scenario that is unclean, has rotting stuff in it, right? Like there's some potential bad things there. But if you're rearing them in a nice, clean environment, you're following good methods, you're keeping things clean. The can't talk today. I need to not process 1,000 pounds of Frass before we do this. I'm going to try to schedule that better. The microbiome within that Frass is really beneficial, and so you don't want to freeze it because then it kills all that stuff. You don't want to heat it because it kills all that stuff. But there are some regulatory requirements that, like over in Europe, I think they do have to treat it. I think they have to, ensure that it isn't going to have or harbor bad things in it. And so in order to ensure that, I think that they have to treat it in Europe. And from a U.S. perspective, I don't believe right now that Frass is categorized as a manure like cow or pig. And so this varies so much by state. So if you're in the U.S. and you're interested in selling Frass, start researching, start understanding what it is, and make some decisions around how you want to sell and market that. But Sue, you're absolutely right. If you do make it, it's going to only have a very short shelf life. But the Frass itself, before you create any sort of compost tea or spray, if you keep it dry, it's good for years. It'll have minimal degradation. I had some tested many years ago, and then from that batch, I kept some in my basement. So usually about 60 to 70 degrees year round, and humidity is controlled. So it's down around 32 to 37 in the basement. And so it's kept that profile across 2 subsequent tests 1 year apart. So I did 3 total tests over 2 years, one initial one year later, and one year later, and they were all very close from a standard deviation perspective of the nutrients that were in there. So they can store for a really long time. And that's the benefit to just selling that Frass the way it is. You could definitely look into some sort of value add product though, that, maybe you could make like a kit or something where you put the right amount of Frass in a mason jar, let's say, and you can make a concentrate and add that concentrate to some water, that sort of thing. That could be an interesting market, like maybe a farmer's market or some sort of expo that might do pretty well. But I think like right now, people don't really know much about Frass in the U.S. Unless one, they've raised cannabis and they're on the east or west coast. Then they've definitely heard of Frass. As it becomes legalized across the U.S., more and more people are going to become aware of it and learn about it, which will help from a market perspective. But it's one of those things that isn't really utilized in the U.S. yet. So hopefully we get better there. Whew, all right. Let's see. Did I miss anything? Well, in nanotechnology, they can do the ratio that you want, so I guess they have a measurement for the amount of chitin. Okay. Nanotechnology. And do you know what that test is called by any chance? I have a university nearby that Leo, one of my teammates here, he's trying to talk to the soil and lab folks and just kind of see like what sort of test for Frass makes sense. They have a whole slew of tests they could do, but one of the things we want to try to understand is how much chitin is in there. So I don't think they knew a few years ago when I chatted. All right, Facebook. Oh, I got a message from Sue here. This is in regards to the Frass. You also need to check state law, is what Sue's mentioning. They have stiff regulations around whether something's called a fertilizer or a soil additive. You're absolutely correct. So from a Frass perspective, and I'm speaking from my experience in the state of Missouri, where I am. Missouri, every state has a fertilizer group board thing that's a government entity. So in the state of Missouri, there's a fertilizer board, and if you want to sell a product in Missouri as a fertilizer, there are some strict regulations around testing protocols. There are some strict regulations around labeling the actual product, and then testing has to be consistent. So you have to test your product consistently, and it has to fall within a certain range of like NPK. If you're going to claim NPK on a product as a fertilizer, when you test that product, it has to be within a certain range in order for you to say this is what the NPK is. On top of that, there's a yearly fee, and then there's a tax for every ton, I believe. This was several years ago that I looked. So there was a fee for every ton that was produced. So definitely look into what your state and local laws are regarding that. And then if you're going to go from Missouri to somewhere else, what's that somewhere else's regulations? So something to keep in mind. Good point there, Sue. I'm not sure why it's not letting you comment. I don't think I broke it again. Last time I think I accidentally turned the comments off. Let me make sure. Can somebody throw a comment out real quick to make sure that I didn't break anything? No, I don't want to create a poll. Let me know you guys are still out there. Caitlin, I see something's loading. Emoji. Hey-o! All right, cool. We're there. All right. Holy cow. We only have 5 minutes left. 5 minutes till the top of the hour. I can go a little over if you guys have any other questions. Ben is over in the farm right now doing beetle swap. Otherwise, we go in there because I've got in the last week I got the heater installed. I got a grow tent installed to put the pupa in, and so I've got a sensor push in there to get the temp and humidity, and the humidity is at 80% right now. I put a tray with some water in it, and then I put in 4 or 5 trays of pupa, maybe 6, and I'm curious to see what happens with those pupa that are in there. But the goal is to put all of our pupa in there to keep them at a higher humidity to help reduce die-off. So that's interesting. What else did I got a new water tank. A few weeks ago, just haphazardly, one of the folks that I know said that they had someone who was selling an 80-gallon water tank. And so I got that set up here, and I'm using that to refill the humidifier so that I don't have to move a hose or carry buckets of water. So, yay. I'm excited about that just because less stuff I have to do. Belazar, welcome. Welcome. We are technically 4 minutes away from the top of the hour. I'll probably keep going if we've got some questions or anything you guys want to see. I see comments here. Check the food industry labs or animal feed labs. They can do a test for a specific chemical. Ooh. Oh, and then another one here, Whale. Chitin measurement, preparation of samples. Okay, cool. I am not going to be able to do that, but that helps me with some keywords, and then I'm going to do some research here locally to see if I can find somebody that can do that. Oh, perfect. Thank you. Oh, man. I'm really curious to see what just managed to connect. Yeah, I'm not sure what happened there. I'm glad you're here, though. Glad you're here. I'm curious if... just testing a different browser. Okay. From a chitin perspective, I'm curious if the Frass, so there's the Frass, then there's the exoskeletons that are on the top, right? That could potentially be harvested and collected. I'm curious what the chitin level is in that. And then the Beetles. I'm curious about the Beetles because I have a powderizer. And so if I can create a powder out of those Beetles, can I then make, is the chitin accessible at that point to then, and the other thing is it even worth it? Or is it beneficial to increase the percentage of chitin in a product? So could I take Frass, let's say Frass is 5% chitin, I'm just making numbers up. If I can take the Frass at 5% chitin and I can add beetle powder, which was 30% chitin, and get higher chitin, is that beneficial at all? Yeah, we'll see. We will see. All right, well, just in case you guys have to go, since I did schedule this for just an hour, if you have any other questions or I didn't see or answer something in here, I will go through. Once we're done here, Facebook does post the recording. They process it first to make sure we're not doing anything wrong. And then it'll be posted out to the group. I'll go through and look at any of the questions there that I might not have answered here on the video and try to get an answer there within the next day. And we'll try to do, we've got one more of these. I already scheduled it for next week. I'm going to try a Zoom and just see how that plays out. So we've been using Facebook's inherent technology here to do these live events. I'm curious about Zoom, so we'll just test it out next week and see how it goes. You by no means have to be on camera. Please don't think that you have to be on camera when you join. Turn your camera off or don't have one, that's fine. And nobody has to physically speak or anything like that. If you'd like to, we can hopefully play with that a little bit. But next week will be a Zoom just to test it out. And if it doesn't go well, we'll go back to this platform and go from there. But yeah, let's, if you guys have any more questions, definitely throw them in here because I can stick around for a few more minutes here. Well, you need to transform the chitin to chitosan. Okay. So we're going to have to transition that somehow. All right. Sue, live in Oregon. Maybe you can check the Oregon State University test of Frass. Yep. That would be the universities, like soil and University of Missouri has a soil and something lab, and that's who tested the Frass just for me to get the NPK, moisture, and a couple other nutrient levels, but they weren't able to do the chitin test. So I need to do some more research there to see if I can find somebody. But Whale, you gave me some good info to do some digging with. I appreciate that. Whew. All right. Been sitting here for the last hour. I've stopped moving, and so my body's getting a little sore from all the Frass I had to do. Shannon, I saw a video where you were trying to load up your worms for sale in the 3 cups. I had an idea for that. Yes. That was, I think what you're referring to, Shannon, is the 500 count blue bait cups. This is a 12 ounce instead of the 8 ounce. The 8 ounce holds the 500 count. And I was trying to find a good way to fill those quickly without having to weigh every single one. So I took some little, I think it was like 6 ounce cups that I had, cut it down. I weighed out 500, put them in there, added 10%, added a little bit more just because to give me a little extra because of the overflow that could happen. And then I use that, I fill them, and then just dump that right in, and I don't have to weigh every time. Good night. Thank you very much. Thank you, Whale, for coming. Really good info. I really appreciate that. I'm going to do some research in the next week and see what I can find out. Shannon, what about filling that space with foam? The problem with filling the space with foam is when you... Well, what do you mean by filling that space with foam? So, like, I had tried by screwing... Are you talking about when I screwed them onto that board and then I would take the board and dump it? Cups were good, but the works got in the dead space. Yeah, if I fill that dead space with foam, I have to brush them off, right? So then, like, whatever they're on, I'd have to be able to brush them off to where they're not climbing on the, like, whatever the cups are on. So my thought was to put, and this sounds medieval, put some nails on the bottom or something that like helps it stand up from the bottom and the mealworms can't climb up that, and fill the cups on that piece of wood, fill the cups, and if I put that foam then on the, or just inset the cup, put the cup down into the piece of wood, like what's that thing, the shot glass on the boards, so that multiple people can do shots at the same time. I don't know why that popped into my head, but like one of those where the shot glass is in it, like set it to where that thing sits down into it, and then I can quickly brush them off the top and then dump it. Right? I gotta write that down. Well, I got the recording here. I don't need to write that down. I got the recording. That could work. Yeah, if it's like a piece of plastic instead of a piece of wood too, it'll be easier to clean them off. Foam would be sturdy, but if I could get something like maybe like put I might have an old tray, like one of the white dough proofing trays that's broken, that I can get the bottom of that, and then put it on top of a piece of wood, drill the hole into it, set the cups down inside of it, and then I've got a clean surface that I don't even have to wipe them then. I could just, as I pick it up, I tilt it and they'll all fall off. Maybe some of them will come out of the cup. I'll have to play with that. Ooh, that could be interesting. I like that. I'm projecting that I'm going to have a lot more of those cups to fill come springtime, because I went to that bird expo, or the expo, and it was basically all bird stores. So Goldcrest Distributing is a big bird store wholesaler, and every year they have an expo. It was 3 days long this year. folks fly in, they have vendors, and then the folks come in and they'll go through the warehouse basically and look at products, physically touch everything, and then they have an opportunity to talk to the vendors that are selling things either through Goldcrest or, like me, I'm not selling through them yet. And so I was able to get a booth though and talk to people about live mealworms, and there was a lot of interest. And so I'm hopeful that come springtime, I'll have a bunch of those stores reaching out to me wanting cups, and then I'm gonna have to fill them more efficiently than I'm filling them now. So I'm gonna test that one. That's an awesome idea, Shannon. I like that. Thank you. Velazar, magnetic cups for tools. Well, yeah, and in that way, that would be clean and slick, right? And then you could hold it to the board or hold it to something. Yeah. Yeah. That's good. I like that. That's probably going to be a next week or the week after test. I've got a ton of stuff going on right now, so I still feel like I'm trying to catch up from last week when I was out for 3 days. But luckily, Ben and Leo kicked a major butt and kept everything going while I wasn't here. So, all right, we're a few minutes over. If you guys have any questions, throw them out there. My brain's starting to turn to mush, and so I'll probably start just mumbling now instead of saying anything useful. Really good stuff, guys. Thank you. Oh, I didn't talk about the camera yet either. I posted a video of this inside of my fridge. I don't know if anyone figured out what I'm doing with it yet. You add food grade food coloring to mealworms. You could, I guess, for fishing. So that they physically look different. What goes through my head is if food grade coloring in the U.S. is interesting. We being the U.S., still allow food coloring dyes into our food, human grade food, that other countries have said is bad and not allowed and can't do. So there's that. But the other thing that comes to mind is I'm reminded of that study on the styrofoam where they looked at the insect and after 72 hours everything was through their system. So if you add food coloring to them, and like how long is it going to be there? One, are they going to change color? And two, how long would it be? Would they maintain that color? From a consuming perspective, then like what if you just put it on them, right? Like what if and this probably requires some testing, Lucas, the feeding and the feeding and the potentially just applying it on them, how long will they stay that color? Because I'm wondering, like, what if you could include a packet of that coloring to the customer so that instead of you making 10,000 red ones, right? Like maybe one person wants red and one person wants blue. I don't know that market very well, or if that's a thing that people want. But if you could include a little packet somehow in the container of whatever color that person wants, or stock multiple different options, like if you're going to stock at a bait store. I'm not sure. I've never tried coloring. I know that when a mealworm eats things that are different colors, like if a mealworm eats a carrot, you're going to see an orange tint to your frass. Now, I mean, you need to be consistent with feeding them carrots. Like you can't give them one carrot and then everything else. Like if I'm doing wheat bran and water gel crystals, if I gave a bin a carrot, I'm not going to see the orange tint, right? But if all you gave them was orange things, their frass will be orange. So that makes me feel like they're going to pass it, at least from an eating perspective. Lynn, what's the purpose of adding food coloring? For bait. So if folks are using mealworms for fishing, it's a common practice in the fishing industry for bait to have different colors as an attractant to the fish. And so what Lucas is asking is there a way for us to make our mealworms a different color so that they're more attractive, right? And I'm not sure. That's an interesting... I think you're less likely to see color change from them eating something. But if you apply it directly to them, I think then it becomes do they absorb it? Does it just stay on their outside skin and they're that color? And if so, how long? I don't know. That's interesting. I haven't seen anybody do that before. That could be an interesting marketing aspect though, right? I like that. Seen some videos on YouTube of people coloring them somehow. Okay. Lucas, do some Googling with YouTube. See what you can find. I like that. We'll try it. Let us know. Post that in the group. Inquisitive minds are curious, right? All right. Oh, I got another message from Sue. Hold on. As you know, there's so good question from Sue. She didn't see the announcement for this session. Just happened to get lucky. Is there any chance of setting up a mailing list that could be broadcast via a PM or a post? That's a really good suggestion, because depending on how many posts we have in the group at any given point, you might not see it. And since we have a pretty active community, posts can go pretty quick. That's a good one. I don't know if there's a way to do that within Facebook, but I'll have to research. Is there, Sue, I can't remember if it was you who was an admin on other groups as well, but somebody was telling me that they were. I wonder if there's a way within Facebook to send that out, or I could pin it to the top of the group, but personally, I dislike having to scroll through that every time I go into a group. And we'd have one there every week or two. But maybe there's a way. And if not, we can look into an email list and blast that out. It would be a private list, so that nobody's sharing their email with anybody other than myself. And it could be an opt-in only thing, right? If you want the notification, provide me your email, and I'll after I create it, I'll send out the link to it, and that way it's less likely to be missed. Unless my email goes to spam, right? It sees the filter, it's oh, it's that mealworm guy again, send that to spam. But your email doesn't do that, right, Sue? All right. If you guys have any last minute questions, let's tackle them real quick. I need to get a hold of the person that ordered all that Frass and let them know it's ready. I told them I'd have it ready by Friday, and got it done before Friday. So I'm going to ping them and see when they want to come pick it up. I think it can fit in the back of my truck has a truck cap on the back. I think it could fit in the back of that. It'd be tight, so we'll see. Add it to your website newsletter. Interesting thought. I could. I don't want to. I like doing these live sessions for us. And if I tie that to the newsletter, then that's more Midwest Mealworms. Although I am posting all these to YouTube, because a bunch of people said that they don't get on Facebook and they wanted to be able to see them on YouTube. And that's going under the Midwest Mealworms YouTube. I'll have to... I also don't want people to feel like they have to sign up for that newsletter to get the updates. I can, from a logistics perspective, Caitlin, I can put together an email list and have a separate... I don't know if I can do it in MailChimp. That's what I use for my newsletter. I can probably create another list in there, but it would be easy enough for me to maintain that in a document or something, all those emails, and then just paste them in there. So I I don't want you to get overwhelmed with too much of me, right? Richard, I've been feeding my mealworms green maple leaf leaves for about 3 months now. And why would you put that out there and leave us in suspense, Richard? Can you post a file here for us to download and then delete it? Keith, a file for which thing? For us to download and then delete it. I don't know if I missed a message or something. They eat them fast. Interesting. I wonder, so Richard, it would be really awesome if you could put together like a summary of here's what I did and here's what I observed, and maybe if you've got pictures too, if you're willing to share that. Because I just have a million questions now. Are they eating them? So you're saying you fed them green. Are they eating them after they potentially have died? Like if you put a brown one in there, are they still interested in it? Are they still eating it? Or are they not? Do they not care about that? Do they eat the whole thing? Like even the veins? Is that the right word for a leaf? They have veins in them, whatever those things are. Do they eat that as well so it doesn't gunk up the processing part? Oh, wow. There's leaves everywhere. Like Substrate, you could use leaves. That's really cool. Lucas, what company is it that produces the most mealworms worldwide? I have no idea. I think Yinsect, YNSECT. It's a European company. I think they've been claiming recently that they're the biggest, if I remember correctly. LinkedIn is a really good place from a business perspective to try to keep in touch with things like that. Yinsect, I believe, is making that claim. However, there's a facility, I believe, being built in Illinois in the U.S. that's going to be the biggest insect farm in the world. I have to go back and try to find the name of it. I feel like Decatur comes to mind, but I can't remember for sure. And then Beta Hatch is obviously going to be up there once they're full scale with what they've got planned. So I don't know who the biggest one is yet. My guess is Yinsect. But they're all going to claim that they're humongous and giant and produce the most, and et cetera, et cetera. The post that you were just chatting about, sorry, I must have misunderstood. Can you post a file here for us? So we were, Keith, we were chatting about a better way to notify folks about these live events, because whenever I create it, I do share it to the group to say, hey, this is here. But since we have such an active community, that post then gets pushed down, right? And so unless you go through and scroll through everything, it's one of those things that, you take some R&R and step away from your phone for a day and you come back and there's 100 posts for you to go through. So the thought was to potentially put it, to create like an email list, and I'll send that out to, do like a blind carbon copy to everybody. So we're not sharing everyone's emails. I'm not going to do that. But putting it in a file, I don't think putting it in the file tackles the problem, if that's what you're meaning. Richard, everywhere but where it connects to the branch. Interesting. Huh. Yeah, I'd be really curious to see. A video would be awesome. If you have pictures, though, that would be very helpful to see like what the consistency is and how do they consume it all? Or is there some of that leaf left in with the frass? That'd be interesting. For live events, make it possible to be added to our calendar. Is there a way to do that through the Facebook event itself, Velazar? I'll have to look at that. The problem is knowing that it's there. Post pictures step by step. Beautiful. Richard is awesome. Awesome. I'm excited about that. My brain was immediately like, oh, okay, go test that. But I already have a million things going on. So I'm so glad that you guys are here. I love it. Not leafy, they eat it all. Okay. Very cool. Very, very cool. Yeah, we're getting into winter now, so at least in the Midwest here, and so the leaves are all changing, and that's why I'm curious if they
the mealworms were eating the dead stuff. Do you freeze it beforehand? Like, is there any sort of treating you're doing to it to make sure you don't get any bugs from the external world in? We do an amazing group of farmers. We do. And Max, you started this group years ago, and look at this. Like, this is awesome. This is awesome. Michigan. All right, yeah, you're getting into the cold weather too. I used to travel a lot for my previous life, which was only changed a year ago. Feels like much longer, but I remember going to Michigan, and the wind is terrible. I did not enjoy Michigan in the winter. Much nicer in the spring and the summer. Much nicer. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and start wrapping things up. So for the folks that stuck with us, I'll go through and look at all the comments again to see if there are anything that I missed there that needs a reply. And then we've got another session. I believe I set it up for Tuesday next week. We're going to try a Zoom meeting. So we'll do 30 minutes just to play around with Zoom and see how that compares to this. So that, if anybody wants to talk, we can do that. You don't have to. By no means do you need to talk. But it'll give us a different option potentially to have some conversation instead of you guys just listening to me the whole time. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. We'll test out different things as we continue to do these things. I will get this posted to, so Facebook does post it. They'll process it and post it to the group. And then I'll grab it and load it to YouTube. So we've got it there for reference in case anybody is interested. And they don't want to get on Facebook, they can at least watch it there. And we'll continue doing these. I'll look into options for like sharing this or broadcasting it, that it's there in a better way, potentially do an email sign up thing. And if you guys have any other questions or suggestions, shoot them my way. Thank you guys very much for all the info. Hopefully you found this valuable. Several things in here that I'm going to have to dig into because I'm curious now. So thank you guys for that. Have a wonderful afternoon, evening, and we'll talk again soon. Bye.